In the 1940s, the Italian fascist regime built a series of agricultural villages across Sicily as a part of a plan to colonize the south of Italy. Borgo Rizza was one of those towns. The title of the summer school is Difficult Heritage because it deals with specific painful and problematic history. And the challenge is how to reimagine the reuse of these towns. The most important building for us in Borgo Rizza is what was called the Entity of Colonization of Sicily. The Entity of Colonization in Sicily was very similar to the Entity of Colonization of Libya. They were built by modernist architects sharing the same intention, the colonization of the countryside understood as backwards and unproductive. Against the re-emergence of fascism today, we have asked to ourselves, is it possible to transform the former entity of colonization of Sicily into an entity of decolonization? We would like to try to answer to this question with all the people that feel the urgency to challenge colonial, fascist, and modernist ideologies.
While discussing and trying to think how to approach this, we understood that we didn't want to impose on the participants any form of predetermined knowledge or expertise. So we decided that instead of creating, these very kind of mainstream standard forms of lecture that are top-down, we decided to let participants to have a sort of more site immersion. So the expertise, let's say, is given by the site itself.
Perché prima non si pensava andare al mare come si fa oggi, oppure andare fuori del proprio paese. Erano le zone circostanti che venivano prese di mira per stare insieme.
Ma in che anni questo?
Vabbè, io mi ricordo intorno agli anni 50-60.
Ok. So we're talking
che
about
non tutti avevano la macchina.
Sì.
E forse neanche il motorino.
Ormai qui non c'era più niente di interessante in questo borgo, era stato lasciato abbandonato a se stesso, quindi dalla mia parte io non ho più portato qui mia figlia, quindi questa generazione non si è avvicinata a questo borgo.
È come se a livello individuale si riesce a costruire qualcosa, però a livello collettivo non è mai stato fatto un ragionamento.
Mai garantito.
Questo è il problema, che
certo,
magari a livello
perché
di piccole cose si è riusciti a costruire una relazione.
non si è mai capito il perché una comunità non sia riuscita, no, a una distanza così breve a costruire qualcos'altro in un luogo che gli appartiene, poi tutto sommato, no?
Quindi la riappropriazione a livello individuale era
Mai
possibile,
nessuno.
ma
Perché cercare sempre all'esterno? No? Perché cercare sempre altri che facciano? Qual è il problema? Qual è il problema? Il problema è il fascismo, no? Questa è una cosa seria allora, se il problema è il fascismo.
Questo è una specie di leitmotiv della politica degli ultimi 20 anni. Ogni volta che ci sono le elezioni ci si chiede: ma cosa facciamo al Borgo Rizza, cosa ne facciamo, cosa lo facciamo diventare, eccetera.
In the last years, the right-wing Sicilian regional government decided to renovate some of these towns exactly in the same ways they were built in the 1940s. The modernist theory of preservation aims to treat the buildings like monumental objects, to be admired for their aesthetics values, removing them from the ideological, social, and political context that produced them. In Borgo Bonsignore, for example, the idea was to renovate the building just as they were in the 1940s. Of course, what is hidden in this approach is that they were designed precisely to communicate a specific ideology. For the fascist regime, the south of Italy was a kind of tabula rasa, backwards and unproductive, in need of messianic modernization.
We are at the Experimental Station for Weight Studies. It was funded in 1927 by the regime. The Stazione Sperimentale di Granicoltura Benito Mussolini. The story of this place really goes together with the entire colonizing and colonization project for these lands and lands overseas. The first years were mainly dedicated to collect, gather, and archive all the local varieties. The second period started really to be more experimental and starting cross-pollinating and improving the productivity of these varieties. The whole program was called the Battaglia del Grano, the wheat battle, in order to make a big propaganda for the nation, in order to make it a national effort to be finally able to become self-sufficient. The varieties that were introduced here in order to be pollinated with the local ones were coming from the Italian colonies in Africa. I think one of the main reasons we are looking at this now within the context of the Difficult Heritage Summer School is because architecture was always coming with a purpose, and also in this case architecture is linked with this food program in a very close way.
After the Second World War, where all these places have been abandoned, some people just occupy them illegally. Now that the towns are being refurbished with the potential for tourism, there is a question about whether or not the people who now live there will be able to stay.
Se non forse le persone, finisce il borgo.
Ma la proprietà ufficialmente è ancora del comune?
Sì.
Paga un affitto?
No. No. Il comune niente ci dammo e niente vuole.
For us, it was important from the beginning trying to build common vocabulary that somehow is also react to the situations, and therefore we started to share several concepts that were also possible actions that can lead us in reusing and subverting, I would say, those buildings.
In your sense, it's easy. You just go and live there, and you in a way profanate it, yeah, and you clean it of its fascist heritage, and then you move on. But apparently that moving on is not so easy. Apparently there's something stopping that moving on, because what the direction that we heard was to try and bring it back. Yeah. So then the question would be, why is it not as easy as you think it is?
Da piccolina, quando ci venivo, avevo questa sensazione, questa cosa spettrale, che ci venivamo facevamo un po' di casino in quei 10 minuti, un quarto d'ora, e poi andiamo perché disturbiamo così.
Lo dava ancora di più perché era dava di più quella sensazione spettrale, perché gli edifici erano proprio abbandonati, no? Con le finestre mezze aperte, le porte mezze rotte, le facciate rovinate, quindi ti dava proprio l'idea di un villaggio fantasma, no?
I don't know, I keep thinking in a word of like memory, that maybe is like a very typical word to think, but like how it's sort of our relationship to memory and the kind of things that we sort of choose to keep preserving in the collective memory, that in that case is very strong. Like they are actively choosing to preserve the collective memory of sort of fascism, but that's how things work. We're like that we have like the monuments and we have statues.
Fascist colonial architecture has been built as a sacred object. Profaning this architecture means reusing it in a very different ways from what it was designed for, subverting its logic. In this way, we hope to open up a bigger conversation about reparations, restitutions, and healing.
There is a growing debate where we want to also try to break a little bit a binary discourse, as if the debate is only kind of like forced and stuck in between erasure, cancellation of traces, and non-critical reuse, preservation, conservation, and restoration. So the space that we want to find and to intervene is a kind of more what we would call a threshold space, so in between. And this is a space where we can actually, hopefully, together with the participants, to try to find ways of intervention.
E la spirale mi ha permesso di materializzare questo concetto che potesse comunque dare la possibilità a tutti di parteciparla, così come il discorso della decolonizzazione, no? Che abbraccia un po' tutti, utilizzando anche le risorse del luogo. Qui lascia, come dire, il segno del suo passaggio.
Because fascist buildings and monuments have not been demolished in Italy after the Second World War, it means there are actually many physical sites that serve as a material evidence of this history and could be potential site for restarting the discussions about de-fascistization and decolonization.